Hello.
I have to unmute. Sorry about that. Hi, how are you?
Doing good. Super excited about tonight. Just need to figure
Good.
out
I've
how to.
got so I'm on vacation with my family. We're doing a family reunion, so I'm like hanging out in the quietest part of the house, which is my
Oh,
bedroom. So
thanks for joining on vacation.
no problems. There's so much important about market research in this community and for this community that not doing it would have been borderline criminal. So I'm very excited about it. And wait, you went to Michigan State?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to but no, let me chat about that first. Yeah.
Well,
I graduated in 13 with my BA in marketing, international business, and German. And then I got my MS in marketing research there and graduated in 2014. So double Spartan, been in the city for almost 7 years. The plan was to, yeah, always move to New York City. So,
yeah. Yeah, mine was Boston, but I ended up here in New York after a
oh,
while. So now, and I
nice.
have a BA in chemistry and a BS in packaging engineering. So
Okay.
I was a little bit of a different path, and I'll talk about that a little bit during our research
Yeah.
conversation. But yeah, but I think everything's working fine, other than I'm
Yep.
really not
I'm
happy with
just
my background.
Yep, I'm just trying to see. One second, I'm going to share my screen. I want to see if I can give you control of my
Oh,
desktop.
sure, yeah.
Let's see. That's like the one Zoom thing I'm just not sure of.
You have me listed as your co-host now.
Yeah, I figured that was step one. Okay, prerequisites. Meeting. What? That's so weird. Oh, so one thing I need to figure out. So sorry. I totally should have done this sooner, but I thought it would just show up as an option.
Yeah, no, and I wondered, I've not done this before either. I just share a screen or
Yeah.
share the ability to share. So if you have to click for us, I mean, that would not be ideal for you, but I've done multiple presentations that way as well. So
Yeah. Okay. Think I got.
you're on mute, Varn.
Hi,
Hi.
sorry about the delay. Hope everyone's doing well.
Or the kiddos.
Hello.
Fine. Just
Thanks so much for joining.
of course, yeah. I'm just gonna be quickly eating, but I'm here and paying attention. I'll just turn my video off so you don't have to.
No worries. Yeah. I'm glad audio's working. I just have to work out some tech stuff on my end.
All right, well, I'm here now, so thank
Yeah.
you again so much for your patience. I'm glad it was only a few minutes late, not not any longer.
Oh, yeah. No worries. Life happens. Plus, like, yeah. Oh, who is perfect?
I hear a kitty.
Yeah, I don't know why he's meowing. He just got fed, so no excuse there. Oh, perfect. We have folks in the waiting room, which is exciting. Hmm. All right, I'm just going to give up and embrace the fact that I'm going to be clicking. No, we're
Sorry.
stressing out about, oh, no big deal. I think it might have something to do with the fact that I'm on a Mac. That always throws things through a loop. So, yep, would rather just click through than get myself all stressed out before this starts.
It's better to breathe.
Yep. Let's see. Oh gosh, I should probably shut my window. All the adjustments you have to make when living in the city. All right, can you see my screen all right?
Yes.
Fantastic. We are good to go then with 6 minutes to spare.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm super excited for this. We've realized that no other chapter of the association has done a Pride event. So this is pretty groundbreaking, which is awesome.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm just like also so excited to be hosting this. I wish it could be in person, but next year for sure.
I'm much taller in person, but it's fun and I love an audience. So this I would love to do this in person next time too.
Yeah.
I'm much shorter in person, so we'll balance it out.
We'll
Scott.
balance it out just fine. Yeah. Well, I didn't say I was tall. I just said I was much taller. I'm still only 5'7".
I'd say I'm short.
Okay.
Categorically, that's
Awesome. So yeah, we're ready to go. And then Scott, your name is pronounced Scott Seitz.
Sites. Auf
Seitz?
Deutsch. Yeah.
All right. And then V, do you want me to introduce you as V Chaudhry? Or
V Chaudhry. Yep, that works.
Chaudhry? Okay.
Mhm.
Awesome.
Yeah. And just really quickly, so while the slides, we have the guide itself takes a good long while to explain. So I don't want to kind of bore people. And is there a part that you would think folks would want me to focus more on than others, or?
Yeah, let me look at that. I would say you can focus more on like the historical context, and then like I would say historical today, and then the conducting research, like if those can get hit on, but I guess particularly like conducting research, because that'll be most pertinent to the audience.
Got it. Can definitely do that.
Awesome.
And will we get a recording after you've gone through all of this? Can we get a recording of it? Excellent. Thanks.
No problem. Yep, we're already recording.
Hey Claire, Kai here. I just logged on early, so I wouldn't miss a thing. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Hi, nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you, Scott. Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back on mute. I have screaming kids in the background. It's dinner time, but you guys are in my kitchen and I'm cooking dinner while watching. So
I have
see you guys on the other side.
Yeah, I have a family reunion going on in the background, and they started drinking about a half an hour ago, so it could get
Oh,
ugly.
Oh, no. We'll have to
that'll
catch up
be
after.
You got to catch up. Exactly. Exactly.
I'm totally capable. We're good.
I'm sure you are. All right. Have a good session, guys. See you on the other side. Thanks,
Thanks.
Claire.
Hmm.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, that will be funny, like entering a party 2.5 hours after everyone else has been drinking.
Well, this all started on Sunday, so we've warmed up pretty well already. It's good.
Oh, awesome.
Really fun.
Where are you for your family reunion?
We're in Newport, Rhode Island.
Oh,
So it's
lovely.
fun. We just had a big boat ride this afternoon and just fun.
Oh, that sounds great. I am so itching to get out of the city.
Right?
Yeah, I was going to go home for the summer, but plans changed, so I'll probably go home for Christmas.
Are you Michigan as well?
Yeah. Yep. Rochester Hills / Port Huron.
Oh, sure. I'm from Monroe, Michigan, right on the
Oh,
Ohio border. Yeah.
got it.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, I'm just going to hold people in the waiting room until there's like more people and it hits 6, and then we'll get going.
Sounds like a plan.
I'm so glad I didn't have any other meetings today, because like 2 hours on camera is a lot, even though I'll be like hiding while you guys are presenting. Yeah, we had 98 people sign up, which is the most I've ever seen.
Oh, nice.
That's amazing.
Oh, and if you have any suggestions on charities for folks who win the knowledge check to donate their prizes to, feel free to plug those when you're speaking. Because we thought it would be interesting to let whoever won like just choose, like, and not mandate.
I'm trying to do a split screen on my little Mac here so that I can look at my notes on my presentation, but
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter. I can get through either way. So
Yeah, I have like the presentation up on second screen so I can focus on Zoom on my Mac. Hoping there would be some more board members on by now, but all right, I'm gonna start letting people in. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started in just a few minutes. If everyone can please mute themselves, turn off video, that would be great so that all attention can be on our speakers. And additionally, for the best view of today's events, I would recommend watching in gallery view with non-video participants hid. We'll get started around 6:03, 6:04. I just want to give folks a chance to join and don't want anyone to miss out on any content. Welcome everyone who's just now joining. We'll get started in just a few moments. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. As a reminder, if everyone could please adjust their Zoom settings to be on mute with video off. And for the best viewing experience, please switch to gallery view and hide non-video participants. So welcome everyone today. The Insights Association Greater New York chapter is super excited to host this event for Pride Month. I'm Claire Kuhn. I'm the president-elect of the chapter. My pronouns are she, her, and I identify as an ally. I'm currently a market research manager at Able2, a leading digital mental health company, and I'm just so excited to be hosting this program and welcoming our wonderful speakers, Scott and Professor V. So how the night's gonna work is first we will have Professor V take us through the guide to LGBTQ plus market research, which is really like a well-rounded approach to, or just well-rounded history and some tactical recommendations as well. And then Scott is going to present a case study about World Pride and brand love. Then after the presentations, we'll do a fun knowledge check trivia game where we'll see how well everyone's been paying attention. There will be prizes, which is exciting. And then if time allows, we'll have some space for open networking. So yeah, thank you all again for joining us tonight. Before we get going, I also want to give a shout out to our 2021 chapter sponsors, our leading sponsors, Remesh, Ivy Exact, and Quantilope, and our supporting sponsors, Insight Loft, SyncScript, Buzzback, Full Circle Research, Research Defender, Data Spring, and Schlesinger Group. I would also like to give a shout out to Abel Flint of Susie. He was the one who led the charge in getting the out in research movement started, and a major component of that was developing this guide. So thank you so much, Abel, for your leadership and getting us, our whole industry, started on this super important journey. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Professor V. Chaudhry from Brandeis University, who will be presenting the guide to LGBTQ plus market research. Just as an overview, this guide will first introduce the LGBTQ community, cover key considerations and best practices for conducting LGBTQ-friendly market research and conducting market research with LGBTQ populations. A little bit about Professor V. He's an assistant professor of women's gender and sexuality studies at Brandeis University, where he teaches courses on transgender studies, sexuality and queer studies, and feminist and LGBTQ research methods. Dr. Chaudhry's academic research focuses on the racialized and class-sized dynamics of transgender serving organizations and funders in the United States. They are also the author of Transforming Inclusion, an organizational guide published by the Leeway Foundation in 2018. Now I will hand it over to V.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Claire, for the invitation here today. And I will second your thank you to Abel, who is the founder of Out in Research, a really exciting collaborative of market researchers who are LGBTQ identified and interested in working with LGBTQ communities. This was a really exciting opportunity to get to work with this guide. And so I'll do a fairly quick overview of what we've got in the guide. To go through all of it would take much longer than the time we have. And I'm sure many of you would want to actually sort of engage the text in there yourself. So please get in touch with either Abel or myself if you'd like to see the guide on your own. And thanks also to Susie for all of the work to sponsor and support this guide and support me in doing this research. So we'll start. So it starts with a brief disclaimer. We'll go a little bit into who's included in the LGBTQ acronym, a little bit about why we wanted to put this guide together, some population overview, including historical context for LGBTQ communities as a kind of topic of interest. And then I'll sort of spend some time with the best practices that we have in the guide. The guide itself then has sources and further definition, further reading, as well as a longer glossary. So we'll go to the next slide. So important to keep in mind as we think about this, the guide is focused primarily on LGBTQ history, and that means LGBTQ communities in the United States, with some attention to the global scale. So many of these things have application on a global scale, but it's really focused on the United States. So it's important to keep in mind for folks who are doing more global or international focused market research. But we imagine that this guide can be adapted to fit global company needs as well. So what do we mean by LGBTQ? Generally, this acronym sort of refers to folks who are gender or sexual minorities. So folks whose gender or sexual identities fall outside of a heterosexual or gender conforming norm. Gender conforming, another word you might hear from that is cisgender. That's a word we define and think through in the guide as well. We use LGBTQ throughout the guide and generally refer to LGBTQ with a sort of imagined plus. And we mean for the acronym to include individuals beyond the acronym. So that's what that sort of imaginary plus is for. We include, of course, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning, but also refer to in that imagined community, pansexual, asexual, genderqueer, and so on. And again, we've got definitions for all of those terms, and I'm happy to if folks have questions as I'm speaking, feel free to put them in the chat. I will pay attention to what's here, and I'll leave about 10 minutes of time at least to answer questions that have come up. So we can go to the next slide. So the one thing that we emphasize throughout the guide is that the diversity within the LGBTQ acronym, which again includes not just the letters represented there, but people who fall outside of gender or sexual norms, is increasingly important to recognize. So when we say diversity within that acronym, we're talking about racial, class, ethnic, and national background, but also about experiences that people have identifying with these categories. There are specific needs that many people within the LGBTQ community or communities might have, but there's many different experiences of what it means to be lesbian, what it means to be gay, what it means to be bisexual, trans, queer, or questioning. So there's that's something that we try to emphasize throughout the guide. So while there's many ways we can be really specific in the research that we're doing, part of that specificity has to do with really recognizing that there's so much difference within the acronym. So why LGBTQ friendly market research? So we make a distinction in the guide between LGBTQ friendly market research, so market research that is more broadly focused on populations, but that is friendly to or affirming of LGBTQ communities. And then we also speak to LGBTQ specific market research. So market research that's focused on LGBTQ communities, which can allow us to sort of see trends and patterns within the communities that we're focusing on. So LGBTQ friendly market research, perhaps unsurprisingly to many people here, if you're here at a Pride event, helps us to create marketing campaigns and products that will resonate with LGBTQ audiences. So it'll ensure that people will understand, to know that your brand will understand sort of who you are and what you want from their company. So really allowing people to feel welcome or seen by the company. There's growing LGBTQ populations. So when you think more broadly about the general population of people, we're seeing an increased amount of people identifying as LGBTQ. And this is particularly true for folks who are Gen Z and millennials. Next slide. LGBTQ focused market research, again, in addition to the kind of growing and diverse population that is LGBTQ or identifies somewhere within that acronym or just outside of it as gender or sexual minorities, there's still very limited data that brands have. So conducting research with LGBTQ populations can allow us to kind of understand these communities that much more, as well as demonstrate the investment that brands have in LGBTQ communities. And studies that have been done so far have shown that that investment is often reciprocated by communities themselves. So LGBTQ populations are often motivated by trust in brands, which a community marketing and insights, an LGBTQ focused market research firm found in 2014. And there's, of course, the increased buying power of LGBTQ communities. So when you think about the bottom line of the clients that you all work with, or that market researchers might work with, or that companies might be working with, you go to the next slide. 3.7 trillion is the most recent estimate that I found for the potential buying power of LGBTQ communities. It's always increasing every time I do the research, so I'm sure this number has even shifted since then, but really incredible buying power from LGBTQ communities. And again, such a diverse community to reach out to and to focus on in market research. So I'll go through fairly quickly this kind of about, which will go over sort of the demographics and general sort of what you need to know about LGBTQ communities. But it is important to keep in mind, and this is a disclaimer that we make throughout, again, that there's no monolithic community or consumer that identifies as LGBTQ or somewhere in the acronym. So that diversity within the community really means that there's no one size fits all approach. So part of what we try to do in this guide is think through those nuances. So the population overview, again, recognizing that any sort of demographic data, because of that diversity, it has to be kind of taken with a grain of salt. So even the data that says, X percentage of people, the most recent estimate being 5.6% of adults identifying as LGBTQ from recent Gallup polls, we can imagine that those numbers are limited because there's a real complexity of the terms that are being used. Identity terms that people use might not be somewhere within the acronym, particularly for communities of color or communities coming from lower SES backgrounds, who might use more local vernacular terms and are also not as likely to be reached out to or included in LGBTQ communities and research. So this is recent data from the Williams Institute at the UCLA School of Law. This is kind of overall LGBT demographic data where we see the largest kind of percentages of LGBT populations. And within the LGBTQ community, we see this is kind of the breakdown that we've seen. Again, this data is sort of not necessarily perfect nor fully representative, but this is the data that we have in terms of who's identifying as LGBT across different age groups. Again, we see lots of more and more young people identifying as LGBT. And there's a relatively even split on what we call gender, although I'll complicate that when we get to transness in a couple of slides. A slight majority of white folks, but a really diverse population otherwise. So go to the next slide. And we've got sort of these socioeconomic factors as well. On the whole, LGBTQ folks face kind of unemployment, lack of insurance, food insecurity, and low income. And this is heightened for folks who are trans identified or who are people of color. So this is important data to kind of keep in mind as we're thinking about serving or responding to or being in relationship to LGBTQ communities. So a little bit of historical context, and this is kind of where a little bit of my research fits in. I'm trained as a cultural anthropologist, not a historian, but that means I do a lot of thinking about historical context for what the present day looks like. So this is really kind of organizing history, which I think is helpful for thinking about how these categories were really formed as ones that people could identify with and organize around. So we see the first kind of organizing around LGBTQ identities and really kind of lesbian and gay identities happening in the 1950s. The first gay organization on record being the Mattachine Society, which was founded in 1950, and the Daughters of Bilitis just a couple of years after that, which was the sort of lesbian counterpart. Unsurprisingly, given that it was the 1950s and segregation was alive and well as the fact that it took some privilege to be able to identify as gay or lesbian and to organize across those lines, many of the people involved in that organizing were white, wealthy, educated, and gender normative. In the 1960s and 70s, we start to see some of the moments where there's a lot of cross-fertilization across social movements. So the civil rights movement is happening, the early feminist movement or second wave feminist movement is happening. So people are starting to kind of gather across various differences to push against various forms of inequality, oppression, discrimination, and state power. So the Stonewall riots is kind of your most recognizable moment of considered kind of the birth of the LGBTQ movement. There were lots of parades, rallies, riots happening at the same time, sit-ins, various kind of tactics that we see, again, cross-fertilizing with things like the Black Power movement, other organizations doing that work and really communicating with one another, and people communicating across groups and across communities to say, you know, we're fed up with the ways that we're being treated, whether that's by the institutions that they go to sit at a lunch counter, or by the police, which was the case with the Stonewall riots. It was an really responding to police presence in gay bars. So that was the late 60s. And then we see the first Pride celebration, which was a protest in 1970 with Christopher Street Liberation Day in New York City. So following that, we start to see kind of yearly Pride celebrations, and it's turned into something completely different than what it began as. The HIV/AIDS epidemic in the 80s is beginning in the 80s, and of course continuing to this day, is important to note because it put increased pressure on health institutions and the US government to protect LGBTQ communities. And it was one of the first times too where we see people rallying around a specific cause, not showing up in space to say we have a right to be here, which is just as important, but also to say our community is dying, people are dying, this is a life or death thing, and you need to pay more attention to us and respond to us. Moving into the 90s and the early 2000s, we start to see a little bit more kind of cultural acceptance of LGBTQ populations, but along with some real legislative backlash, including the Defense of Marriage Act, which Clinton signed in 1996. Clinton also signed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which prevented gay and lesbian folks from being out in the military, signed in this year. Ellen DeGeneres comes out in the late 90s. In the early 2000s, the US Supreme Court finally sort of overturned sodomy laws, which was an important move for kind of formally decriminalizing homosexual behavior. The first state to legalize same-sex marriage, Massachusetts, was in 2004. So again, some real shifts in the tide, but some real things that are kind of holding us back at the same time. The next slide. Moving into the 2000s, again, we've got some real cultural moments. So I end here with Laverne Cox as the first trans woman to win an Emmy. Laverne Cox and Janet Mock and other Black trans women and trans women who have kind of taken up very public roles. We see very much public conversations about transness happening today, as well as the overturning of laws like Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the Defense of Marriage Act, as well as President Obama signing into law legislation to protect LGBTQ folks who are the victims of hate crimes. So some real kind of legislative and sort of cultural shifts happening in this time. But we're not totally in a moment of complete acceptance, right? So while there's been federal recognition of same-sex marriages and increased visibility of LGBTQ people on television and movies and in media more generally, there's also increased violence against LGBTQ people, at least increased reports of violence, particularly against Black trans women. And the Human Rights Campaign has done some really important reporting around this, as have a lot of local organizations. Many of you have probably heard about these sort of debates about access to public restrooms and public accommodations for trans and gender nonconforming people. There's also polarization within LGBTQ communities. 28%, according to the New York Times, of LGBT voters voted for Donald Trump in 2020. So we're not looking at folks who are unequivocally interested in the well-being and interests of LGBTQ communities, even within the community. So again, when we talk about that diversity of LGBTQ identified people, that includes political diversity as well. Moving into the very current moment, the Williams Institute did a great study on the LGBTQ community under COVID. So we kind of covered that as well. There's LGBT people of color really very much affected by this, including sort of in terms of testing positive and in terms of the sort of economic results of the pandemic. Apologies for my kiddo in the background. So thinking about the possibilities for the future, we could keep this going up to the very present. There's lots of moments of real kind of possibility and things we can look to with the future, but also lots of things that are still potentially kind of concerning. There's still quite a global divide with regard to LGBT acceptance. Any sort of studies that have looked at sort of cultural acceptance have still found that there's a real divide across communities around the world. But overall, we do see sort of increased acceptance of LGBTQ communities over time. President Biden has recently signed an executive order that's sort of preventing and combating discrimination for LGBTQ people, which is definitely a promising indicator of what's to come from this administration. But also, this is not necessarily protecting all LGBT people, especially those who are existing with other marginalized identities, including those who are immigrants, lower socioeconomic status, or people of color. Next slide. And again, sort of we see continued exclusion and discrimination. So it's always kind of the history as it sort of you've seen already and continue to see. It's very much one or two steps forward, a few steps back, and lots of increased need for education and advocacy. So in the present moment, in the last 2 years, 2020, 21, the last year, there's been more than 75 bills introduced on the local level that have limited access to healthcare, public facilities like restrooms, and the ability to participate in sports for trans young people, trans and gender nonconforming young people. And that affects not just people who are trans identified, right? These are really limiting kind of the ways people can think freely about their decision making with health, with accessing public accommodations, and with participating in traditionally gendered sports. And then again, continued discrimination, exclusion, active violence, especially against communities of color who are LGBTQ. So we've included a kind of transgender 101 in the guide. And while there are many different ways that you see the category trans being defined, and here we describe it as a category that kind of confounds Western and Euro-American understandings of gender, masculinity, and femininity. Generally speaking, it's an umbrella term that refers to anyone who identifies with a gender different than what was assigned at birth. So for some people, that means I was born female and I identify as male now. For others, it means that they're deliberately living outside of a gender binary. So again, like with the broader LGBTQ community, a real sense of diversity. Recent estimates from the Williams Institute say that 1.4 million adults in the United States identify as transgender. But again, given the ways that these identity categories work, it's likely that this number is an underestimate. So a little bit of this kind of trans 101, a little bit of your sort of intro to how we explain and describe these things. We make a distinction between gender identity, which just refers to how someone can identify their gender, and their expression, how someone expresses their gender. Well, that would be through clothes, accessories, hair, makeup, etc. And the main takeaways we have for trans research are, one, that sex and gender are not the same thing. So biological sex is made up of a variety of factors, including genitalia, what's identified at birth often, as well as chromosomal makeup, hormonal makeup, and secondary sex characteristics. So for many trans people, biological sex is not sort of a clean cut thing, as well as for folks who might be intersex, which means that their sex is not neatly within a male or female binary. Gender need not refer to these characteristics at all. Some use gender to describe how they understand their body parts, like these sex characteristics, while for others, it may speak more to their mind, their heart, or their soul. So when we speak about sex and gender, and if you're filling out, creating surveys and the like, thinking about the distinction between sex and gender can be crucial. Trans people are, like the larger LGBTQ community, far from a monolith. There's many different things that trans people may do, and many of them may not. So making those kinds of assumptions, or it can often take sort of walking a very fine line to respond to and do research on trans communities. One thing that we emphasize throughout the guide is that you may not need to ask about gender. Thinking about in what ways asking about gender is important, whether that's gender identity, gender expression, or biological sex, things that might all come up in different market research surveys for different reasons, right? And so thinking about those kind of things. And Heath Fogg Davis, a political scientist based at Temple University, has a great book that goes into quite a bit of that, Beyond Trans. And lastly, in many parts of the world, gender looks radically different than is what is frequently represented in the United States. So, even as we sort of do all of this work to walk this line and speak about trans research, as soon as we step outside of the United States, many of this language and these categories shift. So moving into the present, we spoke a little bit about Pride as something that's both generating quite a bit of output and supporting jobs. Next slide. But also the site of exclusion and controversy. So again, lots of this complicated both and. There's a lot of critique from Black LGBTQ organizations and communities about the lack of support for communities of color. There's also critiques of police presence and support at Pride events, especially given and thinking about the histories of who has been protesting, who's protesting sort of started Pride as a celebration. And there's finally calls for more community members to for more attention to how racism, sexism, and homophobia come together to influence actual LGBTQ communities and organizing, including and especially with Pride. And then a huge arm of this is the sort of critique and skepticism amongst LGBTQ people of the corporatization of Pride. So many people, you know, it's a space for many brands to get out there and reach out to LGBTQ communities. But people and within LGBTQ communities are often quite critical about how this support from brands needs to extend beyond Pride and Pride Month and result in more actionable relationships with LGBTQ communities. And these, we've given some suggestions here, including donations, partnerships, and conversations. And, you know, one real sort of investment can be in LGBTQ focused and explicitly and deliberately LGBT friendly market research. So that moves us into the next slide. So into the rest of the guide, which is on this best practices. So we've got a section on outreach, surveys, focus groups and interviews, and ethnography. There's a lot of great stuff that we have in here. I will talk fairly quickly through these slides, but I'm open to questions and we can go back and look at them as we have room for the Q&A. So first, with outreach, we encourage brands to create incentives that align with LGBTQ interests and market researchers to create these incentives. So one could be through donating to charity and nonprofit organizations, publicizing your company's contributions to local or national LGBTQ charities. We have some suggested ones here. And Claire mentioned that so with the prizes later, we can encourage you all to donate to some organizations. My favorite is the Trans Justice Funding Project. It gives grants to grassroots trans-led organizing around the country, including territories outside of the United States. So it's a really fantastic organization that that really distributes money around the country. So that's my my plug there. So for surveys, we recommend knowing your specific audience or the audiences that you're speaking to and thinking about and using the most relevant terminology for that audience. And when you don't know that, or even when you do or believe you do, it's important to include something like an other field or a write-in response option. It allows space for people to kind of express themselves outside of the traditional gender or sexuality categories, which are historically belonging to white folks, belonging to folks with class privilege, and just allows you to kind of reach more of a community. And also important to provide respondents with a decline to answer option. Some people might feel uncomfortable expressing that sexuality or gender identity within a survey, but that doesn't mean they should be excluded entirely, but rather space to kind of express that too. So this is some of the data that you might collect that's specific to LGBTQ communities. And we have some example questions on the following slides. So one great one is allowing you to sort of further narrow down your data to conduct LGBTQ specific panels, asking, are you a member of the LGBTQ community? Yes, no, unsure, decline to answer. So allowing for folks to identify themselves outright, or to name that they're not sure what that looks like and means. And that will give you a good sense of who it is that you're speaking to with regard to this kind of information. Sexual identity as an option. So we've got a few different options here, including those within the acronym, as well as, of course, straight and heterosexual, pansexual, asexual, which are not in LGBTQ as an acronym, but often important to people to identify, and another option. Yes, I believe the deck will be available. Both Abel, who I think had to go, but Abel and I will both be available to sort of send off various versions of this guide, I believe. So you can get in touch with us. Another question that might come up is, do you consider yourself to be an ally to the LGBTQ community? One that could come up in many of your surveys, especially if that's to a broad collection of people. Another one is to sort of measure the levels of acceptance from the folks that you're researching or doing surveys of. Which of the following statements do you consider to be true? Thank you for the question, Ida. We have more than just surveys as methods, so we'll get there very soon. But thank you for that great question. Gender identity as an option, gender expression as an option. And again, you'll see different sort of ways of expressing. There's gender identity or these specific categories, and gender expression, which allows space for a little bit of both and not anything, a little bit of everything, etc. Gender expression in terms of mannerisms. So before it was clothing, dress, etc., mannerisms, and that allows people to kind of make distinctions. And it really depends on, again, what kind of data you're trying to get from your communities, right? Especially if you're interviewing or wanting to kind of survey or get a sense of folks who might be trans or gender nonconforming, allowing as much space as possible for different checkboxes, different things, can really not only get you richer data, but also have the trans and gender nonconforming folks who fill out your surveys feel like you're really interested in and attending to their specific identities and needs. And again, offering sort of what pronouns do you use option. For sexual identity, that can often be broken down into behavior and attraction. And again, this depends on what kind of research that you're doing. Identity is one thing, and I believe that's on the next slide, but in terms of behavior, or no, I think we had it on a couple slides previous, sorry, but the behavior has to do with sort of sexual relationships. So if you're thinking about advertising or thinking about how people are talking about sexual behavior and what they're actually engaging in, that can be different than sexual attraction. And with gender questions, we offer an example of what it looks like to reframe questions, which might traditionally be about gender or sex, but instead allow you to kind of do more trans and gender nonconforming friendly research, and thinking critically about when and how and why we ask about gender or sex, and asking amongst your team sort of what information does this provide, and saying, is there a different way to ask this question without us asking individuals to identify their gender or sex? So an example being, do you menstruate? This is not, this kind of question doesn't ask gender or sexual identity, or gender or sex. It doesn't ask about identity, but instead asks about something that would get you sort of right at the heart of what you're looking for, particularly if you were trying to sell menstruation products or you were trying to get data on that. So another area of research that we talk about is interviews and focus groups. So if you're going for a general LGBTQ focus group, you can include as many identity terms in your description as possible to allow for as diverse a group of people to come. We encourage keeping your initial engagement questions open-ended. So rather than assuming that everyone, say you're in a group where everyone's identified as lesbian, because that's what the group is focused around, rather than assuming what that identity means to everyone, you can start with questions like, how do you identify and what should I keep in mind about this identity as we continue our conversation today? Asking folks what being a particular identity term might mean to them and how that influences the ways they spend money or the corporations they support, and asking how so or why not. And of course, being mindful about power dynamics in focus group and interview contexts, which is explained further on the next slide. So while this issue of power dynamics can definitely play out in any and all research, particularly with marginalized communities like LGBTQ populations, qualitative researchers in particular need to pay close attention to how these dynamics can actually play out. So one example is through race, class, and gender. Individuals who are white and come from higher socioeconomic status backgrounds, are college educated, or who are masculine or masculine presenting, might take up more space in a focus group, or believe they can sort of speak for others in the space to say, oh, well, gay people feel this way or that way. And so we recommend suggesting I statements within focus groups in particular, to encourage participants from making these blanket generalizations, which might marginalize other folks who might be in the space. Additionally, another form of power dynamic is between the researcher and the participant. So market researchers are likely very familiar with these kinds of questions. And as an anthropologist, this is something that I'm thinking about a lot of the time, but researchers may kind of inadvertently influence participants with their presence. So it can be important to kind of state your identities and privileges as a researcher from the outset, but emphasize your willingness to learn from your research participants. So even if you yourself identify as a member of the LGBTQ community, it's really important to kind of name your own subject position to kind of make sure that you're recognizing and working against the power dynamics that might play out from the outset. And know, of course, that your data will necessarily be limited by who is and who isn't in the room. Ethnographic research, and this is very much kind of bite-sized. There's so much you could talk about with ethnographic research, but we recommend sort of aiming to challenge your assumptions. So again, with the diversity of LGBTQ communities and within LGBTQ communities, it's important not to enter into ethnographic research with preconceived notions about the groups you're studying. And again, with that, important to pay attention to this diversity and ever-evolving nature of these communities, as well as to note and emphasize the context, the time, place, and demographics of the participants that are there. And then again, donating to LGBTQ organizations as a research incentive is here. We think similarly with virtual ethnographic spaces, which is of course increasingly common under this COVID-19 crisis. So LGBTQ social media users is a new, like a very, always already very vibrant population, but one that we're paying maybe even closer attention to given COVID. Many users in this field sort of use a variety of identity categories and often debate these identity categories. So note that the acronym LGBTQ may not include the categories that people are using online. So again, very important for allowing people to self-determine or self-identify the identity category of choice. And again, with that in mind, keeping questions open-ended, not making assumptions about folks' living arrangements or expectations within the household, as you might sort of inadvertently marginalize or alienate folks. Great, and then we have some sources and extra further reading. So the first is on kind of where our data comes from and more of that. And then there's resources on conducting LGBTQ research. We have one question that showed up in the chat. Okay. If we should be adding other gender identities besides female, male, female, non-binary, prefer not to say. We've included options for the parents. We were unsure if we should add them for the children, being that they are minors, or is a case-by-case basis. That's a great question, Abigail, and thank you so much for asking it. I think that those are great options, especially because with children, there's many people who might not want to identify their children outside of a male-female binary. You might include unsure, and in addition to a prefer not to say or an other option. And I think that additionally, something like pronouns or name use might be interesting too. I think young people are often saying, they'd like to use different pronouns or before they use identity categories, particularly in that age group, that very young age group. It's more about the names that they're being called or the pronouns that they want people to refer to them by. So those might be other ways to kind of gather a diversity of gender identities across the young people that you're studying. I hope that's helpful.
Any other questions? Everyone a sec to drop anything in the chat. If not, we can move on. All right, I don't think we have any more questions. Thank you so much, V, for taking the time to present to our members today. This has been awesome, and I'm so excited to see oh, we have another question. Sorry about that.
Oh, yes, a lot of people time to type, I guess. And we have a few minutes, I think, so maybe just.
Yeah.
That's a great question, Frankie. adding in the screener queue when the client is not is resistant and it's not part of the research design or question. I think that really depends, right? I think if it's possible within your own company to kind of make it policy to say, as market researchers, we find it increasingly important to attend to the diversity of LGBTQ communities or the diversity of gender and sexuality, genders and sexualities, within whatever population or imagined kind of group of people that you're researching, and stand by that. That might give you a little bit of space to say, this is a screener question we put in every survey, and just kind of insist on that. And I guess it depends on what kinds of what kind of resistance you're talking about, and that can be kind of tricky. But yes, I think using even this guide and some of the justification that we have about the growing population of LGBTQ people, right, to say that it's really important that we get this data, that when we ask, identify your gender and we just have options of male and female, we're missing so much about what people are actually, how people are living their lives, what kinds of consumption, consumer decisions they might be making, what kinds of sort of like brand loyalty questions they might be asking themselves and answering, etc. So I think coming up with your own kind of justification as an organization and using the language from the guide to kind of uphold that might be really helpful in that case.
Any other questions?
And I will put my email in the chat. There's a link to chat with me on my web, or to email me on my website, but just to get to me faster. How can we identify and keep track of LGBT belonging on folks over 40, which are less likely to claim they belong to any letter when we phrase it that way? Absolutely. And I think, there's questions we have in there about kind of behavior and identity, behavior and attraction, which might open up a little bit of space, but some of that language may be alienating to folks who are older and maybe don't use the language even of sort of gender queer or cis and trans and that kind of thing. I think with interviews and with focus groups, maybe asking questions about people's living situations can open up a lot, just very broad open questions, right? Nothing targeted in a way that might folks feel uncomfortable, but rather opening up space for to say what kinds of family forms are present. Another question from Frankie: male to female versus a male or female versus man woman on screener identities. That's a great question. I mean, I think, yes, I think often male female can alienate trans and gender nonconforming folks, as could man and woman, really. So I think it's best just to have multiple options from the outset. I think male female doesn't quite describe gender as much as it describes kind of assumptions of biological sex. So I think it depends on what it is that you're trying to get at. Are you interested in sort of things that have to do with biological characteristics, or are you interested in things that have to do with how people are identifying and what group they might choose for themselves? In which case, having a variety of gender options, including man and woman, can be really helpful. And that could be sort of man, woman, trans, gender nonconforming, genderqueer, non-binary, and having a check all that applies. So folks who might identify as trans, but also as a woman or man, can identify as both. So having room for people to identify across different identities. Again, I think it depends. So I wouldn't make distinctions between women and trans women. That can be really alienating as well. I would instead do, I think the check all that apply, kind of, maybe I covered that already, but would help out with that.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for the great questions and for making this such an engaging session. And thank you so much again, Professor V, for taking the time to share this with our members. I think this is just a super, super actionable presentation that right away we can start implementing in screeners, surveys, and research that we're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
Next, we are going to turn it over to Scott, and he's going to present a World Pride Brand Love case study. A little bit of an intro on Scott. He's the CEO and founder of SPI Marketing, a leading LGBTQ agency with over 25 years of experience on behalf of corporate and not-for-profit clients. SPI has planned the strategic entry and supported existing programs targeting gay and lesbian consumers for Absolute Vodka, Miller Coors, Pepsi, IBM, Reed Pop /NYCC, and Barra Research, among others. SPI received a GLAAD Outstanding Advertising Award in 2009 and Best Marketing Program of the Year from Pernod Ricard. Scott has been listed in Out 100 Instinct Men of the Year and has been awarded recognition by several LGBT service organizations he has supported. Scott is a graduate of Michigan State University, go Green, and lives with his husband in Connecticut. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Scott. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Totally my pleasure. It's been really an honor. I had an interesting life that kind of brought me here. So as a little background on it, we started SPI Marketing in 1996, but it was largely, you know, a lot of my motivation behind it was burying 40 friends in 18 months. And the AIDS crisis sort of made traditional corporate life, which at the time I was at Pepsi, feel and act not exactly like we wanted it to do. And I knew there was something better out there, and we formed a really terrific team of people. And we were able to not only go out there and work with clients who were now starting to understand the gay and lesbian community, but they were also, you know, we were also working with people that wanted to do good work. And I think that's the key thing with the agency that we've put together, is that we focus on really win-win situations. It's not boom splat marketing, which is showing up at Pride and then never again until the next year. It's sustainable marketing. It's helping the community. It's getting advocates inside of the community because they're really just as involved in helping your brand as you are. So for us, that's been very, very important. And I think one of the most important things about all of you here today too is that market research is the only thing that's helping bring visibility to the LGBTQIA community. It's a stumbling block for all diversity, and a lot of the work that we did in not only in the World Pride program that we put together, but for multiple other research programs that we've put together has been based on trying to justify and understand what the ROI really is from something like the gay community. Going out there and just doing something because it feels good won't last. So for sustainability, we really wanted to go and find ROI. A bit of history for you is a lot of the spirits companies jumped into the LGBTQIA community early because they could measure the brands. They knew they could measure gay bars. So before there was IRI scanner data, which there still isn't actually, but before all of that was happening, they were at least able to look at 300, 400, 500 different bars across the United States and start putting together an understanding for how big this consumer market really was. And it motivated him even that much more to really just do something and hopefully do it the right way. So we've been very lucky on all sorts of levels. One of our biggest successes that nobody knows we did was we were behind the first 6 seasons of RuPaul Drag Race. And we were also involved in the 25th anniversary of the Rainbow Flag in Key West, Florida, which was with Gilbert Baker, the original flag maker, and creating a 6,700 foot long flag, 16 foot wide, carried by 2,200 volunteers stretching across Duval Street, with one part of it in the Gulf and the other part in the Atlantic. So very, very fun moments over our 25 years. And we have a really great team that stretches across the United States to do some of these programs. We operate in over 10 cities. So let's talk about the World Pride situation. We discovered BARA. We were thrilled to discover BARA and the programming that they do. They have a very large panel that's 20,000 people a week are being interviewed, and that includes LGBT. So, and I'm specific to just LGBT in this case. And what was great about that was a lot of the research that was out there was still not getting into the big numbers, and it didn't really have a brand focus. So we have people like community marketing were out there, and they were developing a better and deeper understanding of how the community was feeling, but nobody was sort of looking at how is that translating into a brand. And one of the things I think all diversity has to do really desperately in the next few years is stand up and own their brand and their segment of the brand, because there's still very, very small markets for all of diversity, not representative of what really is out there. And so this is really a lost opportunity for a lot of folks, and a lost opportunity for this community, because we increasingly depend on the support of large organizations to fund and move some of our projects forward. So to give you a sense of the reach of what the BERA panel has, it's over 1 million people. They have over 4,000 brands that they track on a weekly basis, 200 categories. And in this case, we have over 90,000 LGBT self-identified folks on this. So the other thing that was quite exciting is, and this is just giving context for different meetings that I've been in over time, but we would often see media presentations which had all this information about LGBTQIA that was based on 62 interviews or something so small that it was really not statistically significant. And it also didn't represent the larger community very well, because often they were being given, yes, you're getting direction maybe from the brand to focus on what they know, which was unfortunately mostly the gay male consumer. Because, again, going back to the fact that these folks were watching the numbers in the bars, if you realize that there are only a handful of lesbian bars across the country, and very few that are, unless you know the bars, you can't really identify transgender, et cetera, bars, this is what they thought their market was. So part of what was so critical about this kind of research is it actually allowed us to also start showing all segments of the community. So we were able to look at male, female, identifying, we were looking at people of color, and we were able to look at different regions across the country as we were doing all this as well. So it really helped track your brand at a much better, much deeper, in a much deeper and much better way. So the key thing with the 4 elements of brand health, so they've actually, the way BERA did it is they've kind of boiled all this into, they kind of go back to the very simple 1 number method, which is their BERA score. But it's really broken into 4 categories, which is there are categories that are really just about your brand equity and your brand awareness. And those are today's scores. Those are the scores that tell you what's going on right now. Where are you with the community right now? The tomorrow scores are really the uniqueness and the meaningfulness, which took a massive hit during COVID. And the meaning and uniqueness is what really differentiates your brand from everybody else. But it's also telling you, does the community really look at you and trust you and understand you? And now we're looking at that through the eyes of not only pardon me, not only gay men, but now women and people of color, et cetera. So it was really, a very exciting movement forward for each of these brands. There were 50 that were pulled together, but we had specific clients inside of this that got a more detailed survey. Next page. So this is the fun thing, really kind of a little more entertaining in some ways. They really use the BERA score rather to look at brands and the relationship as a relationship. So it's like you meet them, you're meeting somebody, you're dating somebody, you're totally in love with somebody, you're completely starting to get bored, and I want a divorce. So I think that's a kind of fun way to look at what other brands deal with all the time, as far as how am I staying fresh? How do I look new? How do I look innovative? Where do I fall within the LGBTQIA community? So this was really a fun way to take a look at brand health. And the Bear score actually can translate into ROI as well, because it's just like taking market share, looking at market share, which is a number that people can really get themselves into. Next page. So the building of the program on an average, and again, there were 50, this was taking a look at 50 different companies that were doing Pride in 2019 for World Pride. So the overall interesting thing is the folks that sponsored and were a part of Pride saw a 4-point tick in their lift in their brand health, or if you want to look at it, in their brand equity. This was also important because this was really, this wasn't about their local, this wasn't about their local Pride. These were all the people that actually came to New York Pride. So there could have been additional uplift based on local Pride activations and everything else. Many of the sponsoring brands had already a high level of love here. So if you look at somebody like Target or MasterCard, you'd be seeing that they're already good. So you might only see a little bit of a lift because they were already in one of the top spots. But many of the larger lifts means that the company did a great job. It means that the company found an appropriate way to talk to the community. They were talking to the right people in the community, because a lot of folks brought the wrong message to the wrong community, or to Pride in that year. And they really were able to get a deeper trust with the community, and uniqueness. And that's really the key to building a sustainable relationship inside of the community. And I'll speak a little more to that in a couple more slides. So again, if we want to go back to the brand love example, what you can really do is, if you're looking at the left, you're going to see brands that are building their relationships. So they're usually, they're not always old brands, but they may be relaunching brands, or they may be new brands like Venmo or Chime, or some of the other new banking brands that are out there, where they're starting to get traction, they're starting to get awareness, and they're starting to build that relationship with the community, and they're moving up the ranks from just getting started. Like I said before, some of these brands are well loved already in the community. So you see Netflix and Apple and Target and Amazon and Google, etc. So you had a very little uptick there. But it's important to note that even if you're at the top of your game, this is a community that keeps an eye on you all the time, and a sustainable program and sustainable level of love, if you want to call it that in this case, is really also meaning that you're going to be there for a long time. You don't get to just show up for Pride this year. You don't get to do a cute ad and be done with it. And especially, as I think was mentioned earlier, Gen Z and some of the other folks in the community are coming back in with a vengeance to folks that are just doing pink washing and just kind of showing up to say something once a year, but not involving themselves with their own employees, not involving themselves with their communities, and not reaching a little bit deeper. The other kind of weird pink washing is people that try and do it all at the same time, because that often ends up giving them a little bit of a negative response as people question exactly why are they there and what's going on. And it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that they don't necessarily get their desired response. They can't get it quickly as they might want it that way. Next page. So on the other side, this is the traditional pain point for most older brands. You're dealing with the fact that they've been around a long time. They're not necessarily seen as fresh and innovative. So they're really working their way to get away from the worst case scenario, divorce or boredom, back up into a brand love spot. So you'll see, and you can look at these folks and recognize that struggle that everybody goes through. And know that, again, this is where some of these metrics that are being shown will help you drive back to being fresh and relevant. Because if we're tracking 200 metrics, you're dealing with a much more fine-tuned approach to what you need to do and what you don't need to do. You can see what you've done well, and you can pay a little less attention and really focus on what the community is going to respond to. Next page. So here is just an example of the lift that went on. So some of these folks had an amazing lift. So this is the pre-event score at the bottom, and on the side, we're tracking the post-event score. So that delta there, you'll see that the people on the far right are the people like Target and Apple, where there's already a healthy level of love and they hardly could really move the needle much more. But as you go to the left, and as you even go down, you start spotting the areas where people are really, they either did it wrong and they're not leveraging what's really their best asset, or this is an area where they don't really have the visibility, the interest, or the captured the imagination of the gay community, and they need to LGBTQIA community, and they need to move their brands up into the upper right side of our scattergram here. So what we were able to present to the folks as we looked at all 50 brands, I'm just giving you an example of one, is we were able to show a brand like Hilton, where they were able to move their brand from boring to brand love, or bored to brand love. They moved their points, BERA points, up by 5. They also scored highly inside of their overall brand awareness and their lift. What you'll also see with this in the column third from the left, that's also interesting, is the stronger your BERA score is and the more balanced you are between the awareness level and all of the more emotional future focused levels, you're going to find that you also have a little more play with with the pricing inside of your brand. So for people, if you want to go to Coke and Pepsi land, where it's everybody fighting over an 89-cent 2-liter, this is a real critical point to understand that your brand loyals are actually going to hang around a lot more, and you have some power inside of your pricing, and you don't have to always be crushed by whatever the competition decides they're going to do. Next page. And then each of the brands also was given just an overall dashboard from the BERA research software. And in this case, let's take a look at MasterCard, who did an outstanding job. And in this case, this was the year that they introduced the True Name card to other banks that were going to initiate it. So MasterCard created it and then created programming to get out to people like Citibank, who launched that card this year. And last year, I think there was a couple of their smaller test banks that use this. So more and more, that's an option to all the banks who partner with MasterCard for their financial back end of the credit card. So they did great. The balance between today's score and tomorrow's score highlights the fact that you kind of have to be out there and more involved in making yourself unique. At the same time, you continue to just build your brand. This is important too, because a lot of folks think that, again, if you think the folks who might think that they're building their brand because they've been inclusive with LGBTQIA and diversity people inside of their advertising campaign itself, that might help build them on their brand awareness, but that's not moving forward necessarily with their uniqueness or their brand loyalty. And that's the thing that people really want to build, is that ongoing brand loyal consumer. Again, the brand love sections are split apart for uniqueness as well as awareness, and their pricing score is included here. So some of the numbers you saw in the prior chart are sort of listed here in the dashboard. And they go on to discuss other areas where the brand is benefiting. I'm not going to get into each of these layers because they would involve more and more charts. So let it just be said that they track on so many different levels that it really provides not only a clear picture from the standpoint of the diversity of the people working, or rather that you're outreaching to. So you're not just talking to white gay male, but they're also reaching out to women, people of color, et cetera. And that's showing up inside of some of these other fragment scores. Okay. We've done a lot of different types of research and found different research partners, but I think the key thing here is that we've done focus group research, we've done a lot of other types of research, but the BERA panel for us was the first that we really successfully felt was usable for ROI for some of these clients. And as diverse as companies struggle with what their diversity budget is going to be and how they're going to approach diversity, it really helps give them much better guardrails and a better understanding of whether or not this is going to be effective for them. And for agencies like ours, we need to have these metrics to be able to show that this was the right thing for them to do, and the response to the community, and the response to our tactics even inside of the community, because we again really focus on being a win-win situation with the not-for-profits that we work with or sponsor or feature inside of the work that we're doing. And thank you. Well, you're on mute.
I realized that. Thanks so much, Scott. This was awesome. Really, really appreciate you sort of showing us how LGBTQ plus research works in action within the industry. Does anyone have any questions? Learned my lesson last time. We'll give it a few minutes for folks to type.
Well, we just want to say hey to Frankie, fellow Spartan.
Yeah. Don't get too many on the East Coast, so
not that many.
Really nice to see. All right, looks like we don't have any questions. Thank you again so much for this presentation, and everyone can see Scott's contact info is available there. Definitely reach out if you have any follow-ups.
Excellent, thank you.
So now to move on to the fun portion of the evening, not that learning wasn't fun. I think that we all got such great knowledge from these sessions. But now we're going to put your knowledge to the test and see how much was really absorbed with a trivia game. So I'd love for everyone right now to either download the Kahoot app on their phone or navigate to kahoot.it to join our game. And then once you're there, the PIN number will get you into the game. So I'll give everyone a few minutes to set that up, and I will switch gears to the trivia game. All right, I see Jill and Sam have joined. All right, seeing a few more folks entering. We'll get started in just a sec. And yeah, the prizes are all donations to LGBTQ plus organizations of your choice. So for the winners, get excited and start thinking about which charity you might want to donate to. We're happy to provide suggestions as well. And I'll share my screen. We can all see the game. Give folks 2 more minutes. All right, let's get started. So all of the questions are based on the presentations that you saw earlier. There are 1 or 2 fun ones thrown in just to truly test overall pride knowledge. So let's get going. So question 1, in which year did the American Supreme Court lift a nationwide ban on same-sex marriage? Oh, 5 people got it right. The correct answer is 2015. We have Jill in the lead. Next question, what does GLF stand for? Ten seconds left. Ooh, 6 got it right. GLF stands for Gay Liberation Front. And Jill is still in the lead with Maya falling up closely behind. Billy Porter made history, becoming the first gay Black man to win an Emmy. What show did he win his Emmy for? Ten seconds. Pose is the correct answer. It's available on Netflix if anyone hasn't seen it. Okay, looks like we have 2 folks that are pretty neck and neck. How many adults in the US identify as LGBTQ? Five 5.6%. Everyone definitely paid close attention to the stats part. What led to the striking down of federal recognition of same-sex marriages? Looks like that one's a freebie. Ten seconds. All right, everyone got, oh, not everyone got that correct. And Maya has taken the lead. Generally speaking, transgender is an umbrella term that includes any individuals Oh, awesome. Everybody got that one right. Maya's still in the lead. Who did RuPaul crown the first ever virtual drag race winner on Friday, May 29th? Any drag race fans in the crowd? Correct answer is Gigi Good. Or no, not it. Jada Essence Hall. Have not watched that season. Under whose administration was Don't Ask, Don't Tell repealed from the US military? Correct answer is Bill Clinton. Wait, I don't think that was correct, actually. Sorry about that, everyone. How many Gen Z adults identify as LGBTQ? Correct answer is 1 in 6. What does the L in LGBTQ stand for? That was a fast one. Glad everyone got that right. Which is one of the largest LGBT magazines in the US, founded before the Stonewall riots? And the correct answer would be The Advocate. Oh, AJ making a comeback. So like this one's double points. Who designed the rainbow flag, one of the most prominent symbols of the LGBT community? Scott definitely mentioned this one. Ooh, most of you got it. Gilbert Baker. Is it politically correct to include an other field or a write-in response option? Yes, it is politically correct. Which dance craze made mainstream by gay icon Madonna originated in the LGBTQ plus underground ball culture? And the correct answer is voguing. True or false? The Stonewall Inn was New York's only gay bar in 1969. Ooh, got it. False is the correct answer. Has anyone on the call been to Stonewall before? Feel free to unmute or or add camera, whatever.
I have a few times since I'm from New York City.
We hosted a not Insights, but Big Apple Big Ten, another board I'm on, hosted an event there for World Pride, and it was so fun. It's just cool being in such a historic place. What is Christopher Street Liberation Day? Fun fact, in certain European countries, Pride is actually called like Christopher Street Month versus Pride. And yeah, celebrates the first Pride celebration, which was a protest. Oh, Quali V is crushing it. Who is often referred to as the mother of Pride? Brenda Howard, everyone got that. Why is the rainbow flag a symbol of LGBTQ pride? Rainbows are a symbol of hope. That one threw some folks off. Gender identity, and this one's multi-select, describes how someone identifies their gender, includes which terms? All of the above are gender identity terms. In 2004, which was the first US state to legalize same-sex marriage? And Massachusetts is correct. On average, what level of lift do Pride sponsors see in their overall brand health? Four points is correct. Where did the rainbow flag debut? And the correct answer is San Francisco. Coming up on close, now's the time to go for the win. Which US university opened the first office for LGBT students? Correct answer is University of Michigan. You can tell I did not write this question. Which is the oldest surviving LGBT organization in the world? Center for Culture and Leisure. Double points for this one. Which country holds the record for the world's largest pride parade? Correct answer is Brazil. Which brand experienced the largest lift in brand equity as a result of sponsoring Pride 2019 or World Pride? Sky Vodka is the correct answer. Last question. Which US state became the first to outlaw discrimination based on sexual orientation? And Wisconsin is correct. Let's see who our winners are. We have Jill, Maya, and Quali V. Would everyone mind unmuting and sharing their cameras so we can celebrate our winners and find out which charities they would like to donate to?
Hello.
Hi, thanks so much for joining, everybody.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, happy we were able to host that and line up such exceptional speakers.
I guess I'll start first. I would like my contribution to go to Rainbow Railroad. It's a charity in North America for anyone in LGBT communities fleeing more hostile regions in the world. So individuals fleeing persecution, violence, things like that. They do a lot of really good work.
Awesome. Thanks
Yeah.
so much for sharing. Yeah, I thought it would be more fun to let folks highlight their favorites rather than just being like, oh, we're going to give to the Trevor Project. So thanks so much. Maya, who would you like your donation to go to?
Hi everyone. So I unfortunately I just could join like by the end of the session. I was stuck at work, so sorry for this. I'm actually from Brazil, so I don't know if I can find like something from here or it should be in North America.
Oh no, any sort of LGBTQ plus charity that will accept an online donation is totally fine.
Okay, can I search for something and then I'll send an email?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, thank you.
You can just send it to our chapter email. It's insightsgny@gmail.com.
Okay, perfect.
And Jill, who would you like your donation to go to?
Hi, sorry, my camera isn't really working right now.
No.
But, I actually didn't have anything in mind. I don't know very many, so like I'm open to suggestions, or if there's one that, because if there's one that you suggest, but I don't have one in mind.
Yeah, I know Professor V mentioned one. I think it was the Trans Defense Fund. Does that sound like a good option?
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This was so much fun, and just, yeah, super excited to see market research become more inclusive to LGBTQ plus individuals. Awesome. And with that, we're going to end. We're at time, so don't have time for networking. But once again, thank you everyone for joining. Huge thank you to Abel Flint and Out in Research, Professor V from Brandeis, and Scott Seitz from SPI Marketing. Have a good one, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great,
Bye.
great. Bye.